Well, hello and welcome and Happy New Year to all our returning friends. And if you're new here, just want to tell you that we're Charlotte Wildlife Stewards. We are a chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. There are now at least 19 chapters, and there are a few new ones forming. So if you're not in the Charlotte area, but you're in North Carolina, go to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation website to find a chapter that is in your area, and I encourage you to get involved with them. We do have a website, charlottewildlife.org, and I encourage you to check that out. We're also on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel. So any of these past programs that we've had that have been online, you can actually go there and see those programs. We also have our email up here on the screen. So if you have any questions, comments, if you want to reach out to us, we certainly welcome you to do that. So our mission is to create, protect, preserve wildlife habitat through education, engagement, and enjoyment. And tonight is one of the education pieces. We have Steve Goodman that is going to be talking to us about the wildlife corridors and what their role is and how they're really helping wildlife. Ernie?
Thank you. Excuse me for interrupting, Donna, but I wanted to let everyone know on the on this session this evening that today is Donna's birthday.
Oh, Ernie.
So be sure to wish her a happy birthday in the chat, and we're really happy to have her as our chapter president, and we hope you had a great birthday today and with many more to come, and just wanted to get that in there. So it's back to you, Donna.
All right. Thank you, Ernie. All right, it's been a nice, quiet birthday, which is fine. My grandson, my 15-year-old grandson, called me a little while ago, so that was really special. Okay, so anyway, this is a picture of Chantilly Chantilly Ecological Sanctuary. And if you're in the Charlotte area, I really encourage you to take a ride out there and walk through it, and you'll see where some of what we've done out there is we put in some bird boxes, we've helped with some plantings out there and certified it as a wildlife habitat. Which brings me to the next slide, which is about having a wildlife habitat. As we know, especially in Charlotte, all over, in every city, development is happening and it's not going to stop. So we really encourage people to create wildlife habitat on their property, whether it's their home property, where they work, where they worship, anywhere that you could do a pocket. I mean, this is a beautiful example of one. There's food, you see the elements listed there. Wildlife needs everything that we need. So food, water, a place to be safe, place to raise their young. And then we encourage using sustainable practices like not using pesticides. The more insects you get into your yard, you know what? You're going to get more birds in your yard because 96% of baby birds only eat insects. So keep that in mind. You don't, so far as water, it can be an artificial water source like a bird bath or a pond. It doesn't need to be a natural source. You can also, as far as food is concerned, you can use natural food like you can see here. The black-eyed Susans provide a nectar source. You can put up bird feeders. There are all different ways you can do it. So reach out to us if you've got questions about it. If you want some advice, we can certainly help you with that. Just drop us an email and we'll get back with you. Another thing that we encourage is volunteering, whether it's with us or another organization. But we would really like to have people volunteer with us. We try to do some boots on the ground activities. This was a picture of when we put those bird boxes up at Chantilly. We had some folks come out from the neighborhood, and then just some other areas of Charlotte that came and helped us. In September, our Kids in Nature Day, we had 20 volunteers from the community. We couldn't have done it without them. This is another thing I'll encourage you to think about in the coming year, and we'll have some opportunities coming up. So keep looking at our website and our social media pages because that's where the information will be coming from. And then events coming up. So this coming Sunday, the 16th, that's right, it's this coming Sunday, we'll have another one of our I Spy Nature walks. We do them year round. There's as much out there in the winter as there is in the summer. It's just different. And actually, sometimes you see more when there aren't leaves on the trees. This picture is one that I took at Reedy Creek. It just caught my eye. There was fungus and moss, and you see the little acorn hats, and I don't know, I just could not take a picture of it. So anyway, our next one is at Evergreen Nature Preserve. It's one of the small hidden gems in a neighborhood in Charlotte. The address is there on Norland. It's also up on our Facebook page as an event. So we really hope that you will come out and join us at 3 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon. In our February program, we're going to have a speaker from the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and she is going to talk to us about the threatened and endangered species that are in North Carolina. This is a picture of a peregrine falcon. When I was looking up some of these animals, I was really surprised to see that the peregrine is considered endangered. And that's not just in North Carolina, that's in the entire United States. So we're just going to go ahead and move on to our program with Steve Goodman. He's a conservation biologist with the National Parks Conservation Association and has worked with this Interstate 40 Wildlife Connectivity Project. He's going to be talking to us about that. Just a little bit about Steve. He has 20 years of experience studying sensitive wildlife and habitats with the aim to find a balance between the need for novel research and using existing best available information to make good decisions about how to conserve wildlife and landscapes. We know that this is a big issue, not just in North Carolina, but all over the country, and it's getting more and more attention. Steve he has worked as a wildlife biologist for Virginia Tech, Arizona Game and Fish, and Washington Fish and Wildlife. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and finance from the University of South Florida, and a Master's of Science in biology from the University of West Florida. So let's welcome Steve, and as he brings us this interesting program.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Donna. Appreciate the intro, and I just realized that I got to give a shorter intro. That was too long. That was my fault. But thank you, Donna. It was great to hear about all the work you guys are doing. And thank you, Madison, and hi, Ernie, and Happy New Year to everyone. Before I really get started, and to highlight what's just within the forest as you travel along I-40 in the Pigeon River Gorge, I want to start off with this 1-minute video from one of our cameras, a few hundred yards within the highway boundary. And if you can, go ahead and crank up your volume so you can hear the traffic and hopefully the bears walking on the ground. It's just a great video. So on that camera, that wasn't really part of our research. We just set it up with the hopes of getting some really nice videos of bears, and we got lucky. We had that bear family for weeks, and I'll close with another video, but just some good footage there. And just to show you how close these black bears are to a busy highway. Okay, this evening I'm going to give an update on a research study in the Pigeon River Gorge. First, I want to recognize my co-researcher, Liz Hillard, research scientist with Wildlands Network, who has really been a fabulous partner in this study. Also, Jeff Hunter of NPCA and Ron Sutherland of Wildlands Network for their vision in getting the study off the ground and funded, as well as their guidance and support. Our research is just one component of a large collaborative first convened in February 2017 to discuss solutions to wildlife mortality and landscape connectivity concerns in the Pigeon River Gorge. Over 25 nonprofits and state and federal government agencies are currently involved. And their level of support for this research really has been tremendous, being it loaning wildlife cameras, collaring elk, sharing data and expertise, top-notch media and outreach, or attending our quarterly meetings. I want to give a big shout out to Federation state staff, Liz Rutledge, Tara Moore, Manley Fuller, and Tim Gueswicki for their partnership and support in this collaborative and for a lot of their work with wildlife connectivity issues. And this is just a couple photos of some of the field trips we've taken, and we've had several in-person meetings, but we've done a lot Zoom here, obviously, in recent years. So the collaborative's mission is to improve wildlife's ability to cross I-40 in the Pigeon River Gorge that will result in improved public safety. And this photo is an aerial photo taken from a plane of the study area. But before we could begin to fulfill this mission, we needed data, and thus the need for research was born. Our study area runs along I-40 from the Maggie Valley exit in North Carolina to the Foothills Parkway in Tennessee. And it's that blue line there, that section of I-40. Many animals are killed while attempting to cross this winding and dangerous section of I-40. Prior to this study, anecdotal reports of large bear mortality years include 50 to 75 bears killed in 2011 from the state line to exit 37. This according to a park biologist, and 129 bears killed in 2013 in Haywood County, according to several NCDOT employees. Both of those years were associated with poor oak hard mass crops in the fall. And so two of the defining features of the roadway that block or inhibit wildlife movement across this landscape are large stretches of rock cuts, as shown here, carved out during road construction, and tall Jersey barriers in the median, the latter serving as dangerous obstacles for wildlife. So wildlife mortality brought us to the table, but an equal or greater threat is the reduction in landscape connectivity. So reading this quote here by Ben Goldfarb in his article in The Atlantic, collisions may be road ecology's most obvious concern, but fragmentation is roadkill's pernicious twin. This pernicious twin represents the barrier effect, which occurs when wildlife ceases to even attempt to navigate road structures due to increasing traffic and noise, thus limiting foraging, breeding, and dispersal opportunities. This is nicely depicted here in this slide produced by Marcel Hauser, one of our road ecology expert consultants from Montana. So my probably less than 45-minute presentation will first briefly discuss why it is important to protect this area. Then I'll provide an update on our field research, and then lay out some next steps, and finally talk about other important components of the overall collaborative. So why here, why now? From an ecoscape perspective, why expend valuable conservation resources here in the Pigeon River Gorge? Well, first, looking at a map of federally protected lands across the US, we see that compared to out west, there's a relatively small amount of protected lands in the east. And the Smokies and surrounding national forest lands, including Pisgah and Cherokee, make up a substantial portion of it. Researchers have estimated that currently in the eastern United States, only 2% of natural land areas retain enough connectivity to adequately allow plants and animals to track climate change. And they went on to say that by adding wildlife corridors, we have an opportunity to increase that percentage tenfold. So we can improve this situation. Here's a map of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Administered Conservation Blueprint Project. It too highlights the significance of the Smokies and surrounding national forest lands. This nationally significant habitat corridor is critical for the long-term flow of regional plants and animals. And I don't know if you noticed on the last slide, but I'll show it on this slide. I've highlighted where approximately our study area is on this map and the next map too. So we're kind of right in the middle of it all. The Nature Conservancy's Migrations in Motion project further highlights the importance of this area. Based on modeling of the climatic needs of individual species, this animated map illustrates predictive movement routes of around 3,000 mammal, bird, and amphibia species under current climate change projections. I'm not going to run it here, but you can see how over time projected animal movements track through the southern Appalachians. Everything kind of is predicted to move up the spine of the Appalachians. So just type in migrations in motion into Google and this map will come up. It's really, really neat to look at. At NPCA, we advocate for national park protection. So why is it important for us and others to work outside of national parks? Well, as I'm sure most of you know, most wildlife species, especially the larger ones, don't recognize park boundaries. For example, Jessica Bronstein of University of Tennessee and her black bear research in the Smokies reported that most of her GPS collared bears left the park at some point during her study, with 93% of males doing so, with home ranges as large as 111 square miles. And this picture here, the blue is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and our study corridor is to the right in the red. And here's some pictures of GPS collared bears, and we actually caught these, or captured these on our cameras, our right-of-way cameras. But they were collared in the park. After nearly a 200-year absence, elk were reintroduced into the Smokies in 2001. The population has grown to 150 to 200 animals and has expanded outside park boundaries. Busy roads, resulting in direct mortality and barrier effects, represent a threat to further expansion and long-term population health. So now I'm going to move on into our, give you an update on our research we've been conducting out there. But before conducting research, our first priority was to get up in the air with our partner, South Wings, to tour the project area, which we did on several occasions. Then we conducted a primary literature review and had several ride-alongs and interviews with regional subject matter experts on black bear, elk, and road ecology. And just me personally, I had never worked on large mammals. I had always worked on smaller stuff like tortoises and red-cockaded woodpeckers and black-footed ferrets. So this was all kind of new, new species for me to understand. Luckily, my research partner, Liz Hillard, she actually has a lot of experience with elk. She got her master's degree following elk around in the park. So luckily, I could learn from her as well. And then after all that, in several field visits, Liz and I met regularly at our what I call our mini offices around Asheville, which are coffee houses, to spend the next several weeks to design the study. And this was in late 2018. So zooming in a bit here, our study area runs along I-40 from the Maggie Valley exit in North Carolina, 28 miles to the Foothills Parkway in Tennessee. It's basically about halfway between Asheville and Knoxville. In December, we concluded 3 years of research. Our target species of black bear, elk, and white-tailed deer were selected because they were relatively easy to monitor and are the ones of highest concern from a driver's safety perspective. But we also surveyed many other smaller species. So presumably by improving safe passage for the larger mammals, generally other smaller species should benefit too. This spring, we plan to submit a final report that we're working on right now for the last couple months with crossing recommendations to the 2 state departments of transportations because our study area is in Tennessee and North Carolina. And looking on this map, the blue is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The green are the Pisgah and Cherokee National Forest. The stippled area is the Harmondin Black Bear Sanctuary. And then the brown squiggly line kind of near the top is the Appalachian Trail. And the little pink areas are conservation lands from Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, who are big partners in this project. And in fact, they purchased those lands because of this collaborative. And for those of you not familiar with the area, that the pink label there that says Harmondin exit, that's the exit you would take to go to Max Patch, that pretty famous bald in that area. We employed a multifaceted research approach to assess wildlife road mortality, 2, assess wildlife activity within the forested highway right-of-way, and 3, assess wildlife use of existing structures that weren't originally built for wildlife back in the late 60s, early 70s. And then fourth, identify and predict elk road crossing locations using movement information from GPS collared elk. I won't really talk about number 4 there because Liz and Wildlands Network mainly led that effort, but that's going to play into our recommendations as well. But these 4 measures together will guide our recommendations to our DOT partners. And we have several folks from the DOTs in our collaborative to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and improve wildlife connectivity across this ecoscape. I will just show a little bit about the elk research in the sense that Liz and I were fortunate enough to be able to assist with some elk collaring in the park and outside the park too. So that was a great experience. And one of the GPS collar examples is up in the upper right-hand corner. But a special thanks to Justin McVeigh of the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission and Joe Yarkovich from the National Park for collaring all the elk. For research objective 1, assessing wildlife road mortality, through data sharing with the commission and the 2 DOTs, we curated historic and recent mortality data and wildlife mortality data, that is, in addition to our weekly driving surveys. This cub on the left was unable to safely navigate eastbound I-40. And on that same day, its mother and sibling were also killed on the westbound lane. It's always weird. Like, I feel like sometimes I give too many photos of dead stuff, but there's a lot of good things happening because of this research. So, but we need to understand the problem, and that's why I'm just presenting this. I'm not going to do too much of it, but just to kind of show you the situation on the ground and kind of why we need to, one of the reasons we need to take action. And so this young bull elk on the right was hit near Waterville, Tennessee, eventually making its way down to the river where he had to be euthanized. He was born in Cataloochee Valley, which is the area where all the elk were originally reintroduced in the park. He was captured and tagged as a 2-day-old calf and was one of several elk hit or killed over the last few years by vehicles. A special thanks to Colleen Offenbuttle with the commission, Michelle Hunt with TDOT, and Dave McHenry with NCDOT for sharing their roadkill data. For research objective 2, assessing wildlife activity within the forested highway right-of-way, we divided the highway into 116 400-meter segments or 400-yard segments. We then randomly selected 30 segments stratified by the historic wildlife mortality levels and excluded slopes greater than 65%, or 65 degrees, I'm sorry. And we added 4 more segments in areas of particular interest. 2 cameras were deployed along each segment, usually within 40 meters of the highway. So all of our cameras, or the vast majority of our cameras, were between 5 meters and 40 meters from the highway. We positioned them away from looking away from the highway because we didn't want to get our SD cards all filled up with traffic. But here's an example of one of our camera locations here. And you can see how close it is to the highway. For research objective 3, we assessed wildlife use of 21 existing structures. Again, these were not built for wildlife in mind. We selected structures that, based on size, were at least potentially suitable for black bear use. And they include metal drainage culverts, concrete creek culverts, bridge underpasses, box culverts, river bridges, and the double tunnel, which is I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is where I-40 goes through that big ridge coming down from the mountains. So for all of our camera trap work, we used high quality Reconyx cameras. Again, I want to give a thanks to our partners, Colleen Offenbuttle and Justin McVeigh of the Commission and the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for camera loans and funding. We had about 20 stolen or shot. It's kind of a rugged area in more ways than one where we work. And but the Commission and Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, they kept giving us new cameras so we could keep our research going. So without their support, we couldn't have had the level of research that we were able to pull off. So here's a high-level summary of our results. So we deployed 115 cameras, wildlife cameras, 47 at 21 structures and 68 at 34 forested right-of-way sites. Those cameras logged in over 70,000 trap days with 31,000 unique wildlife events, including 4,600 white-tailed deer, 2,700 black bear, 1,900 coyote, 1,200 bobcat, 71 elk, and dozens of gray and red foxes and otters, and then also the occasional eastern spotted skunk and long-tailed weasel, which are both species of conservation concern. And we processed over 3 million photos. Next, I'm going to share many of those photos and GIFs, where you just take a bunch of photos to get consecutive photos together and kind of makes a quasi little video from our wildlife cameras that I think are pretty informative. And then I'll sprinkle in some summary data slides as well. So first off, our slides from our right-of-way cameras, again, really close to the highway. And on most, I've added inset photos, either on the top right or bottom right, inset photos for spatial context. So you can see where they are in the landscape. Here, an elk and or calf are moving parallel to the highway. One of the biggest surprises to me after starting our research was the abundance and richness of wildlife observed so close to the highway. When Liz and I designed this research, I mean, we were thinking, oh, we get a couple dozen bear and elk or something. It's like, we were just amazed at thousands of animals, all different taxa. So it's a lot of data, and it's a great problem to have when you're trying to find solutions. And it's a black bear, and we get some very large black bears in some of our cameras. And this guy it's quite a hefty individual. And you can get and see how close he is to the highway there. And we detected higher rates of black bears at cameras along public and conservancy lands than those along private lands, which is not really that surprising. And bobcats, it was a similar situation with bobcats. And we're also seeing a higher bear mortality around camera stations along protected lands. Again, not too surprising, because that's where the bulk of the bears are. Of course, they occur in private lands and rural landscapes as well, but it seems the densest populations are in nice forested, well-managed areas. So this sow and her cubs appear to be running up from the highway. Note the truck lights in the background. And this is what this site looks like during the day. This is up near the Waterville exit in Tennessee, on the Tennessee-North Carolina border. And this is taken from that same camera, and it's a group of bucks descending on down to the highway. And you can kind of see the highway in the background to the left there. And then this photo was taken just a mile down the road, and this doe, and actually she had 2 fawns, they must have spent a whole week in front of our cameras. We got thousands of photos, and each one was getting better and better as we're clicking through them. And all of a sudden this one showed up with the fawn licking her nose, and it was just one of the best photos ever. So this one's always fun to show. Generally, we observed higher deer detection rates at right-of-way camera stations adjacent to private lands than those adjacent to public or conservancy lands, which was not really that surprising, since rural private lands tend to have more fragmented and open habitat, which deer like. Elk showed similar but weaker relationships. Of course, both of these are in the protected lands as well, but you just get a higher, denser use in more open habitat, which, I guess the national forests, because they have been fire suppressed for so long, they probably, don't have as much open habitat as they naturally would. So that's actually that's in the works too, to kind of work on that in the Pisgah National Forest in the next 20 years, which is great, which will improve habitat for both elk and white-tailed deer. And here's a bobcat interested in our camera. So a lot of this wildlife, they definitely take an interest in these cameras. And bears, we've lost several from bears where they just chewed them up to the point where they didn't work anymore. But we've gotten lots of bobcats. Here, a bear is seemingly evaluating the highway below. GPS collar research in Minnesota by Dipmer et al. In 2018 documented that bears' heart rates increase as they approach roads up to 200 meters away, or approximately 200 yards away. The research indicates that bears indeed perceive the risk associated with crossing roads. And this is another photo from the same site, perhaps the same bear. And he's actually standing, looking down at the highway there before he walks towards the camera. And just down the road, this small little juvenile, he's staring down at the traffic there. And this actually is an area where we actually have high black bear mortality. And we have dense bear detections. The photo on the right is one of our cameras facing away from the highway. On the left is a series of photos taken from that camera. This bear turns back from the highway at this time. This is a stretch of highway that experiences really our highest bear mortality. The take-home point is that I-40 and other roads can sometimes serve as a barrier, other times as a mortality trap. It's really a risk-reward evaluation for food needs, breeding opportunities, etc., that black bears and other animals must make when traversing landscapes infused by roads. And this is a great set of photos. Two siblings, probably yearlings, though they look bigger than yearlings, but normally they don't stay together past the yearling stage, but they're just, looks like some friendly wrestling there. I had never realized how much bears can walk on their hind feet, or hind legs, until doing this project. And we've got a lot of kind of photos of this kind of behavior. And here's a bobcat going underneath a right-of-way fence, heading towards the highway. And here a black bear is going in the opposite direction, squeezing underneath the fence there. And we've actually had white-tailed deer even squeeze under there. And the reason I wanted to show that was that's not a wildlife fence. That's a right-of-way fence that was put in there 20, 30 years ago. If you're going to do wildlife fencing, one thing that's really important is to bury it in the ground about a foot, because if there's any opening at all, the animals are going to find it, and then they'll eventually just get back onto the highway. So when we recommend fencing down the road, we will be recommended it be buried a foot deep and plus be 8 to 9 feet tall. So this is a photo. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it looks like a box turtle is kind of following the white-tailed deer there. Eastern box turtle, but it was probably, just the white-tailed deer probably triggered the camera, and it just happened to be there was a box turtle. But the reason I want to show you this is these little guys really don't stand much of a chance in the Pigeon River Gorge. Because of that Jersey barrier, there's really few areas for them, even if they could navigate the traffic, they're going to come right up against that Jersey barrier, as a lot of wildlife do. But these really smaller herps and amphibians and reptiles, they really have a hard time. And this guy actually was I saw him last fall, and it turned out he was dead. He must have gotten hit, and then he flipped on over to the shoulder, unfortunately. But this is, considering these animals can live to be 100 years old, adult mortality can be significant for this species. And this is another one of conservation concern throughout its range now. And so this is an elk. And the reason I wanted to show this one, for one, it just kind of shows how big the elk are, but we positioned our cameras to mainly just get bear and deer, because we knew that they would probably be more common. But we wanted to face it down so we could get some of the smaller stuff too, because we wanted to get more than just our target species. So this would occasionally happen where we wouldn't get the whole elk. And at the same site right below it, if you can see it, there's a long-tailed weasel, species of concern, kind of running along that log that we actually placed perpendicular to the wildlife trail, because that's how they like to travel, on logs and rocks sometimes. And because we've gotten so many long-tailed weasels in our project area, we're partnering with the Wildlife Resources Commission to deploy these non-invasive camera traps, where the weasel will walk in and presumably walk in after we've baited it, and then the camera inside will take a picture. And this is part of NCWRC's statewide effort to get a better understanding of the population of weasels, which is thought to be declining significantly. And here's a pack of coyotes highland right along the highway. And other species we've documented, over 50 species in total, include long-tailed weasels, which is in the upper left. River otters, we've gotten a fair amount of river otters where we have cameras down by the creeks and culverts, and there's one there on the bottom left. Eastern spotted skunks, they're in the middle there, increasingly rare species, it seems. And then common, but not too common, and we get the gray fox in the upper right and the red fox below him. In this analysis developed by Liz and her colleague Alex from Wildlands, we've aggregated and compared target species vehicle collisions shown in the bar charts, red meaning high and yellow, orange meaning moderate and yellow being lower. And also right-of-way detection rates, what our cameras are detecting as far as wildlife, are represented by the blue circles. We can further break this down by species and season. Understanding these relationships are an important component toward identifying key areas in a scientific way to focus our mitigation recommendations. So when we're making recommendations, we're trying our best to make sure they're scientifically sound. So if structures are built, animals will use them and they're in the right places. Next are some examples of wildlife using some of the existing structures, again, not originally constructed for wildlife in mind. And here's a group of deer going underneath the Bluffton Bridge under I-40 along the Pigeon River. And this is actually in Tennessee, right before the Foothills Parkway. And same site, different camera. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but on our structures, we put a camera on either side so we could document crossing success. And here a bear crosses under that's again, that same river bridge. And this is the only structure where we've documented any target species safely crossing under the highway in 8 miles of our study area in Tennessee. So pretty important area, though it itself is not ideal. And this is back in North Carolina. This bear, after making a few false runs, finally gets enough courage to shoot out through the box covert out the other side. You can see that it's right under the highway there. And actually bears did use this a fair amount, but pretty reluctant. But then we have this bull elk who just casually walked through it like there was nothing. So this was kind of a big surprise. We thought they would need larger structures. But this was a collared elk from Justin McVeigh of the commission that he was tracking, this one showed up about on 3 or 4 of our cameras. And this is one of the best set of photos. Here's a bobcat and her kitten crossing under the highway in Tennessee. Note the tail signaling by the adult, indicating to its kitten that it's safe to proceed. Interestingly, the kitten was unable to navigate that structure just 4 days prior, likely due to the steep drop-off, or what's referred to as a hanging culvert. It's so steep that, I don't know if this is easy to see, but there's actually a coyote below looking up. And so he didn't jump up there. And in fact, we have none of our target species using that culvert. Bobcats use it and raccoons use it. But these hanging culverts are a big issue with some of these culverts where it's just too steep for most animals to utilize. Not to mention things like amphibians and reptiles. Here's a small group of young elk crossing under the High Bridge in North Carolina, near the Maggie Valley exit. And then the upper right corner, same site, is a big old bull elk crossing through at night or maybe foraging at night. Although the prior examples are noteworthy, most existing structures are lacking in terms of size, condition, and suitable location. Overall, in our project area, there are only a few structures that our target species are using to successfully cross I-40. And in most cases, even those are not ideal under current conditions. This bridge spanning the Pigeon River in North Carolina closely tops the underlying rock surface, essentially blocking movement for large mammals. Again, these weren't designed with wildlife in mind. Here, a buck turns around multiple times and forgoes crossing through this long, dark creek culvert. Because most culverts were developed for drainage, not wildlife, they have a good amount of water flow, which along with low light conditions deter use by most species. In fact, at this site, we didn't have any of our target species, and really no wildlife using this structure, even though it's big enough to carry elk through it. So it's unfortunate that when it was built, we hadn't been thinking about these things, 30, 40 years ago, because this would have been a great structure to move wildlife if it was just constructed a little bit different and had some dry banks through it. But as it stands now, not very effective at all to move wildlife safely. This photo depicts the reluctance of a fawn to enter a metal covert, which based on size and type is unsuitable for deer passage. In fact, we've documented no crossings by deer or any other target species at this site. Deer don't really like corrugated metal or riprap and stuff like that. And it's not surprising when you look into this, it's pretty deep, dark, and we think it's actually collapsed underneath the highway. So I'll go over a couple of animals that will use it, but actually very few wildlife use this, even though it's perhaps large enough for some of them. This is on the other side of that culvert, on the Pigeon River side. Here at Black Bear, we have bear who are interested, but they never enter it. So it's just too wet, too dark, maybe too small for them to actually cross through it. Back on the other end, this gray fox shows some interest, but decides against entering the culvert. In fact, at this and all other wet culverts, we've observed 0 successful crossings by gray foxes, red foxes, striped skunks, spotted skunks, or long-tailed weasels. Because of this, along with the high Jersey barriers up on the highway median, I-40 is a near complete barrier in many areas for most small to medium-sized mammals. So 28 miles of mostly complete barrier for a lot of these critters. But luckily, a few species do take advantage of these types of structures, including raccoons. They don't mind it dark and they don't mind it wet. So get lots of raccoons using these type of structures, which is great. Also otters, we get otters using these wet culverts. And this is actually an otter scaring away a great blue heron as it's coming out the culvert. And here's another shot of a otter going into the culvert. And this one we actually documented coming out the other side. So we have documented them using these all the way under the highway. And this is a pretty long distance. This is a really long culvert. 4 lanes of traffic plus really wide shoulders. Although bears do occasionally safely cross through this box culvert, entrance is on the left. And also the camera's up in the tree, kind of facing where this bear is heading. And we've gotten let's see, 4 cameras stolen from this site. So we eventually put them up in the trees, and that worked for about 6 months, and then those got stolen, unfortunately. But again, although these bears occasionally will use this culvert, often they divert from it, like here, and cross at highway grade instead, which suggests a good location, suboptimal structure, perhaps lack of fencing. This stretch of highway is one of the highest mortality zones in our project area. And we're actually finding a relationship where we're finding high mortality near structures that potentially could be used. So that's kind of one of the interesting findings. Similarly, black bears often use this set of drainage culverts, but also attempt to cross at grade 2. Again, suggesting good location, suboptimal feature, or suboptimal structure. But this was actually a really big surprise when nobody knew that this was happening. And we actually get quite a few bears crossing through here, which was really a nice discovery. It's a set of 3 culverts, and that's probably why they're not afraid to go in it, because there's a level of openness to the landscape. And plus, it's in an area that's real conducive to move wildlife. But this is another area of relatively high bear mortality despite this. And here's a large black bear that's killed almost just a little down the road from this culvert. So this is kind of just, if you can, just focus on the black and the red here. This chart is geographic in order. Moving westbound, it compares structure use, structure used by wildlife, with right-of-way wildlife detection rates. The black bars are data from our forested right-of-way cameras, and the red bars are the monitored structures. So to highlight the zero values where sites didn't have any target species, bear, deer, or elk, I circled all the structured cameras just to kind of highlight that. Again, there are only a few structures, but looking at this, that our target species are using to successfully cross I-40 to any meaningful degree. For most other wildlife, including mesocarnivores and particularly reptiles, amphibians, and fish, the highway is even a greater barrier. On a much brighter note, and there's a lot of bright notes coming up in the future, a lot of good things happening. One big exception and an example of what is possible is the double tunnel, which is serving as a de facto land bridge and an important wildlife corridor for many wildlife species, including black bear. This camera was set up on a wildlife trail, and this black bear, or lots of black bears, use that tree as a scent or a scratch post. And this is not a doctored photo. It just looks like he's waving. It's a great be great for a card. And there's those dueling bears again. They were up on top there. And get gray foxes, red foxes, lots of bobcats, eastern spotted skunks, and long-tailed weasels. So we get a lot of diversity up there. It's a great place, and that's kind of what we're after. We want to, while we can't replicate that exact situation, getting a land bridge or two in our study area will allow all species, hopefully, to move across I-40, and that's what we're really after. And of course, coming down off the double tunnel, there's a lot of, a fair amount of deer using that as well. So next steps. Through mortality observations, camera trapping, and elk GPS collar tracking, we've gained tremendous insight into where wildlife are attempting to cross I-40, where activity levels are the highest, and an understanding of the permeability of the existing structures. In this spring, we will be submitting formal recommendations to TDOT and NCDOT after running them by our technical committee for new wildlife structures and improvements to existing ones, including fencing where warranted. New structures may include size-appropriate culverts, wildlife underpasses, and land bridges. Here are a few examples from Canada and Washington State. And then here's an example from the Arizona-Nevada border. Actually, Arizona and Nevada now have 4 these land bridges that are specifically for desert bighorn sheep and mule deer and other desert wildlife, 3 in Arizona and 1 in Nevada. And those were going on in Arizona when I was working there, though I wasn't a part of that project. But it's just really exciting stuff that they have figured out a way to get the deer, the bighorn sheep across the highway. And this is kind of by the Hoover Dam outside of Las Vegas. This is heading into Arizona. So just a great project and a lot of motivation for us for what hopefully we can accomplish as a collaborative. But what's exciting, before we even give those recommendations, is that we're already working with NCDOT to improve wildlife passage at 5 previously planned bridge replacements in our study area, including here at Harmon Den, again, where you would get off at Cold Springs exit to go to Max Patch, where proposed plans, as shown in this blueprint, include creation of wildlife pathways and benches that are shown in green, wildlife fencing that's shown in pink, and jump out structures in orange, all for wildlife. So this is a great opportunity to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and improve landscape permeability in this important wildlife area adjacent to the Black Bear Sanctuary in Pisgah National Forest. Construction began this past fall, and our consultant, Terry McGuire, a retired highway engineer from Parks Canada, has been key to our successful engagement. In fact, Terry, he was the lead engineer for a lot of those wildlife structures in Banff National Park in Canada. And so he's just a great, we've retained him, and he's just a great contributor to this project, his expertise. And so this is a testament to the trust we have built with the DOTs. They're excellent partners, and the value that our collaborative group is bringing to the table. Our research is just one component of the overall collaborative. Other important work from particular, these partners, including the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, include passage of federal highway wildlife crossing legislation, statewide lobbying, advisory and technical teams, fundraising, land acquisitions, and public outreach and communication, among all the other great things that the Federation does for connectivity outside this collaborative. And the latter, the public outreach and communication, this includes the launch of our official logo and website, Safe Passage, as shown here. I want to give a big shout out to Ellie Wells of Ellie Wells Marketing and the entire communications team for making this happen. And here's some of the recent media attention we've gotten, our collaborative, I say we, the collaborative has gotten, particularly as NCDOT has moved forward with that wildlife underpass. Special thanks to Frances Feigart with Great Smoky Mountains Association for her skilled efforts in authoring many high quality magazine and newspaper articles. And she always has an eye for lifting the voices of others in addition to wildlife. And also a big shout out on her popular children's book, which was inspired by our collaborative work in the Gorge. So if you have children 7 to 13, pop me an email and I'll send you a link on how to get one of these. Just a great little children's book. And just the pictures, a lot of the pictures and the drawings are just direct representatives of the Pigeon River Gorge. So it's really neat. And then most recently, she wrote and produced a 4-minute music video performed by the Asheville musical trio, The Fates, which also greatly elevates our overall mission. So kudos to Frances. She's a great partner. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions, but wanted to first end where we started with a video of that bear family the very next day. So if you can, turn up your volume. It's just fun to listen to all the sounds. Thank you for allowing me to present.
Okay, thank you, Steve. We do have some questions. We have one from Julie, and it says, the Kootenai National Park in British Columbia has a demonstration of below-ride wildlife corridor at Radium Springs in a heavy people traffic area between the parking lot and the hot springs facility. It contains a wall of interpretive materials and stats on the benefits and number of animal crossings each month, along with screens showing crossings that were recorded by the research wildlife cams. These are fascinating and really help with the buy-in. Has Great Smoky Mountains National Park considered a similar outreach exhibit?
I don't think so at this point, but it's not that they wouldn't consider it. I can't speak on their behalf. I will say that part of what Frances did with her book, they actually designated, they have these like hiking trails that they designate for kids, like a mile walk, and where they have stations about certain things dealing with the Smokies. And her book was one of those, was the theme of one of those walks, where the 12 different stations were like each a different animal and their association with highways and stuff. But that's a great idea. So I definitely should bring that up with them.
Are there plans for more crossings along, well, you kind of talked about that in those areas of high mortality. I guess one thing I was wondering is have there been, studies, in other parts of the country where they're doing this too, was whether wildlife prefer an overpass to an underpass?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think it's all context dependent, right? But generally the gold standard are overpasses. you know, and overpasses that are solely for wildlife and not dual use necessarily. But underpasses can be excellent too. You know, in the Gorge, it's going to be kind of hard to get a new underpass because you would have to actually dig into the rock. So overpass is going to probably be the best choice in our area. But, you know, both of those have great advantages to their own, each to their own. But generally, land bridges is what's considered the gold standard.
Okay. And okay, Doug asked, have they thought of converting the large box culvert into a more natural looking crossing? Or is this road used by road crews too much?
No, that's a great question, and that's the kind of stuff we're working on right now. We've completed our data analysis, and now we're getting ready to meet, and we're going to put all the maps on the table, and everybody's going to put their heads together and start thinking about these things. But that box culvert is high on our list, and we've talked about, you know, I've actually gotten several suggestions, you know, making it more natural, but also maybe enlarging it or putting fence to it. But that area is so important. That could be one of the areas we recommend an overpass. There are issues, and that is used by, it's actually adjacent to Duke Energy, where they go down into the dam. It doesn't get a lot of traffic, but it still does get, it's only one way, so you can only go off the highway one way to get to it. So it doesn't get a lot of vandalism too much, other than our cameras getting stolen. But you know, those dual use things where you've got humans and wildlife, they're not the best, but that site has potential, and everything's on the table for that site because that's our highest black bear mortality area and some of our highest detections too. So it's a great question. I wish I could give a better answer, but that's going to be in the works. So we're really just now done with the data analysis. Now we need to really start thinking about recommendations. And I mentioned Terry McGuire before, who's built dozens of overpasses, underpasses, all kinds of things for wildlife. He's pretty famous in the road ecology world. He's been down several times. We've toured areas that we think we're going to want to mitigate, and that box culvert was one of them. So we've already made some preliminary kind of thoughts and recommendations there. But I like the idea of making it more naturalized. That's a good idea.
Can we get a follow-up email with the link for that book? And yeah, we will get that, and it will go out with our follow-up email.
Absolutely. I'll send the link to the book, and then also I'll send the link to the video.
Oh, that'd be great.
Pretty good. It's actually a pretty good video.
Yeah.
I mean, when you can make a song out of saying things like underpasses and and bridges and make it like sound good, right? You know, in a song, it's actually really good. But yeah, I'll be happy to send that book out. And I was actually, I mean, Frances is a good friend of mine, so she's done a great job on this. And what's neat about it is that she really tried to, you know, of course you have talking animals, right? But all of the natural history notes are real, like whether, you know, the bear eating corn or white acorns. You know, there's just the ecology is sound. And at the end of the book, she goes over each one of those animals and gives a more in depth. So it's a great educational tool. And even as an adult, it might bring a tear to your eye. So it's a good story too.
Let's see, Jennifer asked, is there anything we can do locally about animal and car collisions on the highways in our own areas?
I'm going to have to think about that. I'm trying to think, because that is a busy area. And actually, Ron Sutherland with Wildlands Network does work in that area with wildlife cameras. And boy, I feel lame. I just can't give a good response to that. Right?
Well, of course we have.
I'm not working in that area, so it's kind of tough.
We have, you know, the typical deer crossing signs, you know, all over the place. But there's, in Charlotte, the deer population is really high. And I guess one thing I would say is if you see one deer, slow down, because they're going to, you know, they travel in numbers. So you see one flying across the road, you know, slow down, stop, because there are going to be more behind it.
Yeah,
and then out in the eastern part of the state where the red wolves are, I know the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, North Carolina Wildlife Research Commission, and I think the state were working on getting some signage that's movable, like the big marquee kind of signs, so that if they know some wolves are in a particular area that are near a road, they can put, they can move it around as the wolves move around, because that's been a problem. Some of the red wolves have been hit by cars, and we
Absolutely.
can't afford to lose any of those.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
just back to the question again. Yeah, so far as, what can you support as a citizen? I guess, if there are efforts like ours, maybe not this big of an effort, but, the state, they have transportation specialists with the commission that work with the DOTs to promote wildlife crossings. So if you can somehow get keyed into where they're trying to do work, Travis Wilson with the commission is constantly working with DOTs. And what's important is it's not always like where everything's getting killed. You also got to combine that with where are the natural places where they're going to be protected in perpetuity, right? Because sometimes mortality can happen when there's less habitat and they're being squeezed and there's really nowhere for them to go. So you always want to look for those opportunities where you have some green space, conservancy lands. But I guess writing to the DOTs, going into their office. I mean, this project they're doing now, it's hugely popular that the DOT now is getting involved in this area. So yeah. I think hopefully to the questioners, again, not a very great response on my part, but hopefully there'll be more to come in your area too.
Yeah, well, I think, the Charlotte area has become so developed, and, the roadways just fragment so much habitat that it is a big problem. And I guess part of it is just trying to be more aware, but, or especially too, if you kind of keep up with, the typical breeding seasons of animals, when there's going to be more movement going on, that's one way you can, at least you're more aware of it.
Yeah, and if you could get a underpass or something in an area, then fence it for 2 miles on each side. In areas that's feasible, you could do. Those are hugely successful when that's done. It's tougher when it's a more urban environment, because you can't fence people's driveways and stuff.
Yeah. Let's see. Another question from Heather is, once these wildlife crossings are in place, do you continue to monitor the target species for the use of the crossings? And if so, for how long do you propose to do this?
Oh, that's a great question. So for the answer is yes. And right now, like the Harmon Den one that they're actually working on now, and that's a dual use structure. That's kind of an opportunistic kind of thing where they're building wildlife features, but it's still, human. They have the road underneath and stuff. But we're continuing to monitor that site right now. We did have to take our cameras off the bridge because they, tore the bridge down. But we're monitoring that area, around that area. And once that bridge is complete in the next year or so, we will be deploying more cameras to assess the success of it. And so, yes, the answer to that is yes. And that's a very important component, right? You want to make sure if you're going to spend millions, we're going to be asking, the DOTs to be spending millions of dollars. And the last thing you want is the wildlife not to use it or not to reduce mortality. So yes, some post-monitoring is definitely in the works.
Okay. And Doug commented that it's too bad you can't get the car insurance agencies involved, because it would be in their interest. That might be an industry to target for a little bit of grant money if you need it.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea. It's a good idea.
Okay, Ernie has his hand raised.
I just wanted to follow up. You mentioned this a little bit with the Department of DOT, but they foot the majority of the expense for building these. Is that correct? Or where else does funding come from?
Yeah, and that's, as far as the funding, this will be stuff I'm getting into more now that we're done with our research. But yeah, so that's a lot of the reason why they haven't been able to do too much, right? Because the DOT doesn't have a lot of money, and they really are on the hook for that's coming out of the DOT from my understanding. But what's interesting, some of these new federal highway bills that have recently been passed, there's dedicated funding for wildlife crossing. So now it's not a matter of, is there money out there? Now, will the DOTs pursue that those grants. We working with TDOT, Tennessee Department of Transportation. They actually applied for one of the new RAISE grants, $40 million grant they proposed, and they were going to put $11 million of wildlife structures in our project area. And they didn't get the grant, unfortunately. We just heard about a month ago, but that was a new grant under this new program that they tried for. They're real, they're competitive. So I think having the DOTs, I think more funding is out there. And then from our collaborative, we started this Safe Passage Fund. It was seeded with $100,000. So we're actually raising money now. And once we have more concrete, like we want this land bridge here, we want this here, then we're going to really start campaigning all the different collaborators and then raising funds, because we want to be able to help DOT either match, as good faith, as seed money. And then so I think there's a lot of opportunities for funding coming here.
So it sounds like that if people here watching this want to give support, they can donate to that Safe Passage org, and also continue to communicate to DOT to go after these infrastructure funds that are available. So I think the more people they hear from, the more likely they're saying, well, this is what our citizens want. Let's do it. Yeah,
no, that's great. That's a great point, Ernie. And if they, folks here, like our collaborative, we welcome anybody to come to our calls. Our last Zoom call was 70 people or 75 people. It's like, so if you hear of something, and if I hear of something getting going in your area, I'll send it, because obviously when you get around people, more people, the better, right?
Patricia says she was so glad to see future plans and would love to see more. And she said it should be willing to pay for the funding through license fees. That's might be another option there. Sure. And then getting back to the comment about the eastern part of the state, Cassia said, right now we're seeing a critical need for more wildlife corridor implementations in eastern North Carolina. The challenge is complex due to the lower elevation and the wetlands in the area. Would fencing, slower speed limits be a successful way to navigate the issue of vehicle collisions with black bear and the critically endangered red wolf, where there are not opportunities to build land bridge or more culverts?
There has been work done in eastern North Carolina. I guess it's Highway 64. 3 underpasses are in place now for wildlife, with a half a mile of fencing on either side. So there's work going on. I just don't know if it gets publicized, but absolutely the fencing is critical out there. As long as you're fencing it to a structure they want to use. Lowering speeds, it's funny, there's a big debate. Well, it's not even really a debate, because I think the debate is settled. There's been a lot of research on where they designed studies to test whether speed limits help. And at least in the studies out west, they're not helping, because the problem is the roads are designed in a way for a certain speed, and regardless of what the speed limit is, that's what people are going to do. So it's a compliance issue at the end of the day. And so it's just it's one of those things that I think everybody wish we could lower the speeds, and that would help. But on these highways that are 65, 70 mile highways, or 50, even 50, the real solution is getting crossings. So fencing would definitely help.
Oh, and here's a better explanation of what I had mentioned earlier. The North Carolina Wildlife Federation has purchased 2 large portable electronic signs to help with bringing awareness to drivers in eastern North Carolina, and will be moved to where red wolves are moving. And we hope that will help. So I think that's a key too in certain areas. It's just the awareness.
That's a great point, especially when it's like specific like that versus just like a deer sign where everybody forgets about it.
Right.
But a red wolf, I mean, that's something special. And you said are they gonna be flashing?
It says portable electronic.
Yeah.
So cool. I think, especially, I think they'll be very visible. Margaret had commented when we were talking about the fragmentation in Charlotte, is that she said she would think that the greenways are an area of acting as wildlife corridors, and they certainly are. And Charlotte is working on having connectivity of all the greenways. And then there's the Carolina Thread Trail, which is, working to have, a trail that runs all the way across the county, Mecklenburg County. We do have a lot of greenways and wildlife preserves. We have a good number of those in Charlotte, but the fact is they're in the neighborhoods. There was one out in my neighbor across the street. There was a doe out there last night. I mean,
You
it's
know, if
something
you
we
can,
see all the time.
but those greenways, if you just keep connecting those, and obviously the wildlife, I mean, fencing is important, but also just corridors are important even without fencing, because wildlife, they're smart. They're going to go where, as much as they can, where it's safe. So, just continue with those green corridors and hopefully fence in key areas that will, funnel them. But that sounds, it's definitely challenging.
Yeah, and Jeremy just commented that his backyard acts as a wildlife corridor. So
There you go.
that's awesome, Jeremy. Keep
Yay.
it up and encourage your neighbors to help, help maintain that stays that way.
I just want to thank everybody for those questions. I'm so used to working where I'm at. I wasn't really prepared for, that's a whole different level of road ecology, and so I'm going to make a commitment to better understand, that urban interface a little bit more, because there's definitely, I'm sure there's a lot of research out there and there's some solutions.
Right.
But that's a note for me to up my game.
Right. And what we're seeing is more of like raccoons and possums and skunks, the smaller,
Sure.
I mean, deer certainly, but we don't see too many black bears crossing our roads.
Yeah.
But anyway, well, thank you so much, Steve. It's been a delight having you and learning about what's going on up there. And it gives us hope that things are moving in the right direction for wildlife. I want to thank everybody that's been here. And again, check us out on social media and our website at charlottewildlife.org. Thank you and good night.
Right. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Ernie.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.